Well, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas right here in this room. We've got the nativity set up over here for tonight's program. We've got the poinsettia out, the giant wreaths. Boy, it's looking like Christmas. And this is a busy season of the year. You know that. You're running around doing things. We've got programs like tonight, the children's program. We've got meetings and parties and get-togethers and gift exchange, which means some of you are still running around purchasing gifts you should have bought before, but you didn't, so now you're doing it. This is a season of the year people oftentimes feel overwhelmed. You can get yourself in a bad mood if you're not careful. And so in this Christmas season, if you start to feel stressed, then just remember the word stressed is the word desserts backward. Eat a piece of cake and some Christmas cookies and you'll feel better. It works for me, so give it a try and see what that does for you as well. This is a season you want to try to enjoy it. Enjoy it as best you can because it's a great time of year. As I think about Christmas, I've been preaching on the look. It looks like Christmas. Picking up on some of those iconic images. Pictures that require no words. Doesn't take any kind of text to tell you what it is. You just see the picture and you think Christmas, the birth of Christ. We've looked at the Magi. We looked at the shepherds. And today we look at the star of the show, the Star of Bethlehem. And when you see a picture of the star shining over the city of Bethlehem, you think Christmas. Matthew is our text. Matthew chapter 2 tells the story of the Star of Bethlehem. Artists have tried to imagine what that star looked like. What did the Magi see? Now, the text won't say much except they saw the star. They saw the light in the sky. It doesn't really describe. And so artists do the best they can. Sometimes they'll make it very bright, like this first picture shows you. It'll be a bright star, because they imagine that's probably what it was, something that stood out among all the stars of the sky. Maybe. Sometimes you'll have an artist, and we'll have a beam of light coming down from the star to the town of Bethlehem, like this second picture shows, and thus pointing out the place. Yeah, it could be. And sometimes they make it so big, it's almost like an explosion, like daytime. Well, we don't really know what it looked like. And for our purposes, I've toned it down just a bit. The picture I've using for our background is just the simple one. It's nighttime. You can see the stars, you can see the dark. And yet you see the bright star and you see the town of Bethlehem. And as you look at that, you're thinking Christmas, the birth of Jesus. Now, while I may not can tell you for sure what the star looked like, I can tell you something about that star. First, it was a sign from God. A sign from God announcing the birth of Christ. You know how signs operate. You see them all the time as you're driving along the highway. A sign can tell you information such as stop, yield, or maybe even advertise, here's a place you can buy something to eat. Signs sometimes give you direction. Turn right, go so many miles, you'll get to this town. Turn left, you'll get to a different town. But signs communicate information. And so it is the Star of Bethlehem was a sign from God that communicated information. It announced the birth of Christ. When Matthew tells the story in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, here's how he begins. He says, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, back in the days of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and they asked this question. Where is he, the one that was born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east. We've come to worship him. And the star told them about the birth of Christ. Now think about how significant, how historic that star was in the context of Jewish history. Centuries and centuries of prophecies about the coming Christ, and people have just been waiting for that prophecy to be fulfilled. I mean, how long have they been waiting? You can go back to the last Old Testament prophet, Malachi. That's 400 years before. Go back to Isaiah. That's 700 years. Back to David in the Psalms. He talked about the Messiah. That's 1,000 years. Go back even further. Get back to Moses. Before that, to Abraham. Even all the way back to Adam, however long that was. And ever since Adam, they've been talking about this child that would be born, this Messiah, this King of the Jews. And they waited and they waited and they waited. And then the Magi announced he's here. We saw his star, and the star indicated that the Messiah has arrived. And so it is, they're looking for this King of the Jews. They're looking for the Messiah. Now, I'm always a curious person. I always wonder, how did they figure that out? That is, how did the star communicate that information to them? You know, stars don't talk. They don't use words. They just shine up in the heavens. So how did they look at that star and then figure out that the Christ has now been born? Now, we're not told. And so I've got to look at the possibilities here. Some point to their astrology. They're into the thing of astrology, the stars, the heavenly bodies, and they direct our fate. Now, I'm not into that. I don't believe in astrology. Don't believe in all the stuff that people do. And I don't advise people to go look at their horoscope. Now, I tell you that you'll do it anyway if you feel like it. But I would at least advise you this: don't spend good money having somebody create your personal horoscope or read your palms. If you want to throw your money away, give it to me. I'll take it. Listen, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, and yet I still got to wonder, how did the Magi, who are astrologers, how do they look at this light in the heavens and then figure out Messiah's been born? Could they somehow have gotten it in their little thing of astrology? I don't see how, but who knows? God works in strange and mysterious ways. But you know what? Maybe God gave them a word, a revelation. Perhaps maybe an angel appeared and gave them the clue. After all, in the Christmas story, there's a lot of angels making appearances. We've got an angel that appears to Joseph to talk about the child. An angel appears to Mary to talk about the child. An angel appears to Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. And then the angels appear to the shepherds on the hillside watching their sheep. So I suppose an angel might have appeared to the Magi. A word of God might have been spoken. I don't know. I do know something else about those Magi. They love to study ancient writings, see if they can gain any kind of wisdom. They studied the scriptures of the various religions they were aware of, including the Jewish scriptures, our Old Testament. Perhaps they knew the star prophecy in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. Numbers 24, verse 17, that goes back to the days of Moses. That was a long time ago. But here's the prophecy. It's a messianic prophecy. I see him, though not now. I can behold him, but he's not near. See, the Messiah, I can see him in prophecy, but he's a long, long ways from here. He's not soon. He's distant future, but I can see him. And then it says, a star. A star will come up out of Jacob. A scepter will rise from Israel. Now, the scepter, that's the symbol of a king. A star rises up out of Jacob as Israel. A king is born. You see, it could be a prophecy like that has registered in their minds. And then when they see this unusual thing that they see, they put two and two together. Maybe they figured out that prophecy, that star prophecy has been fulfilled. The Messiah, the King of the Jews, has been born. I don't know how they got there. All I know is this: they show up in Jerusalem and say, we saw his star of the east. We've come to worship him. So where is he? Now, this star that was a sign from God not only announced the birth of Jesus, but it also directed them to the baby Jesus, led them to Jesus. Now, not at the beginning. We sometimes misunderstand how the story worked. In the beginning, the star didn't lead them anywhere. It just simply announced the birth. See, they describe it this way: they saw the star rise in the east. And the description there in the text is along the lines of, as you get down to the sunset in the west and in the east, you start to see the stars. You would see this star, this new thing that is moving up above the horizon, and they would see it in the eastern sky. But they're not going to follow it, because if they follow it east, they'll end up in India and China. They're going to go the opposite direction. They're going to go west and go to Jerusalem. Now, why go to Jerusalem? Because after all, if this sign in the heavens is a symbol that the King of the Jews has been born, they're going to go to the logical place, Jerusalem, the capital city. That's where the King of the Jews ought to be born. So they show up in Jerusalem and say, we're here. Where is he? Herod says he's not here. He asked the religious leaders, where should he be? And they said, well, according to the prophet Micah, he's to be born in Bethlehem. So Herod said, you're in the wrong location. You got to head south. Bethlehem was south of Jerusalem. And so he says, you go find him, come back and tell me about it. And they will take off and head south to Bethlehem. Now, it's when they leave the palace of King Herod and they start to head south, that's where something unusual happens with this star. Matthew 2, verse 9 says this. And so they went out, and the star that they had seen, they saw it back in the eastern sky, way back when they were at home. But the star they had seen appeared again. This time appeared before them. Now it's changed location from east to south. And it was moving before them and then it stopped over the place where the child lay. Now, that's uncharacteristic of a star. Stars don't do that. See, this is God. God is giving a sign to direct the Magi to the place where they will find the Christ child. And the story of the star directing the Magi reminds me of a story back in the Old Testament when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, Moses led them across the Red Sea, and now the question is, where do we go next? God took care of that. He gave them a sign. You see, when God was ready for them to pack up and move forward, He created this cloud, a pillar of cloud it's described, and during the daytime this cloud would move forward and they'd follow it. Now, if they're still traveling at night, it would turn into fire. And this pillar of fire would lead them and they'd keep following. And then when it stopped, they stopped, and if it stopped and stayed and it disappeared, they would camp and just wait days, weeks, months, however long, until it appeared again. Then they would follow it where God led. And God created a sign that led them through the wilderness during those 40 years. Well, God created a sign and led the Magi to the baby Jesus. Now, you may be thinking, boy, that would be cool if God would do that for me today. Because you ever had those occasions where you're trying to make a decision between do this or do that, and you're having a hard time deciding. I keep going back and forth on which way to go. Or sometimes I know what looks like right, but I'm leaning this direction in my heart, and you wish God would just tell you. Instead of you agonizing, He'd just say, do this or do that. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Folks, it usually doesn't work that way. Not now, but not then either. See, back in biblical times, it was a rare thing for God to actually create a sign to show somebody where to go. Most of the time back in those days, it worked for them the same way it still works for us, and that is this. You got to make a decision. Make a decision. And you've got to look at it and size it up and decide what to do. And God's not going to tell you. Now, what God does do is He's spoken His will. He's spoken words of wisdom. They've been recorded for you in the Scriptures, the Holy Spirit-inspired Bible. And you and I are supposed to study the Scriptures to learn what we can about the will of God. Listen to the preaching and teaching and remember what we can so that when we are facing decisions in life, we take what we know, we apply it to what we're facing, and then figure out what God's wanting us to do and not do. And so God's given you the Scriptures to guide you. He's given you minds that can reason, as well as a conscience that gives you the feelings of bad and good to help reinforce when you're making good decisions and bad decisions, right and wrong. God hasn't left us empty-handed, but He doesn't just hand answers to you either. He expects you to make good decisions using the resource that He's given you in His Word. And so it is, there's a sense in which God still guides us today, but not quite like He did with the shepherds and the Magi and the Israelites in the wilderness and all the others that got the special supernatural phenomena that told them where to go and what to look for. We don't quite get that, but we still have the hand of God working with His people if we'll listen and take advantage of what He gives us. Well, the star was a sign from God. It was also a supernatural phenomenon. You watch it closely in the brief description we get, there's something supernatural about that star. But that leads me to pause for a moment and talk about astronomy theories. It's very popular to try to figure out some natural phenomenon that might account for this light they saw in the sky. Now, you know what a planetarium is? One of those buildings that has a giant telescope. You go there so you can see the heavenly bodies. How many of you ever been to a planetarium at Christmas time so they can do a Star of Bethlehem show for you? Now, I've seen them. They're fascinating. What they'll do in those shows is they will try to imagine different theories, different possibilities of what that light in the sky that was in the eastern sky, what it might have been. And in doing so, they'll go back to historical resources, look back at the writings of ancient times, see if anybody else besides Matthew records something strange in the skies about the same time that Matthew says that the Magi saw it. They'll even take things that they know in astronomy, things that do happen, and try to calculate backwards and see if possibly this thing might have happened about the time Jesus was born. So, for example, comets. Comets are a popular theory. You know about Halley's Comet. About every 75 years that thing shows up and you can see it for several days as it's up in the sky. Well, if it happens about every 75 years, just start counting back since the last time we saw it and see if maybe Halley's Comet was in the sky about the time Jesus was born. Now, Halley's Comet did in fact appear in the time of Jesus, but it was in his childhood. It was a few years after his birth, so that one's not going to work. But there's a whole bunch of other comets, and they too have their cycle. And so they'll take every one of the comets that we know about and work the cycle backwards and see if one of them lands on the year when Jesus was born. So far, they hadn't found it. Or they'll try some other theories, and they'll show you that in one of these shows. They'll talk about two planets, for example, 2 or 3, that are in conjunction. Now, you know, as we keep twirling around and going around the sun, it changes where things are located. And sometimes we'll see planets, and it looks like they're coming close together. Now, actually, they're way apart from each other, but from our perspective, it looks like they're side by side, and they're almost bumping into each other. And when 2 or 3 planets are in conjunction, your newspaper will tell you ought to go out tonight and look. It's going to be one of those sights you don't get to see very often. So they calculate backwards the movements of the solar system, see if they can find 2 or 3 planets that were in conjunction the year when Jesus was born. Maybe that was it, they'll say. Or one that really intrigues them is when you bring the moon into it. Because when you get the moon and a planet, an occultation they call it, that's where the moon's out front is so much bigger from our perspective, and whatever planet's behind it, it looks like it passes right by it and disappears, comes out on the other side, kind of like our eclipse when the sun's involved. And if it's the planet Jupiter, that gets them real excited. Jupiter was the king of the gods, and so that's the planet that symbolizes kings. And if you could find, in the year Jesus was born, the planet Jupiter and the moon doing their thing, boy, that must have been what they saw. They've been trying to calculate, see if they can figure that out. They haven't got it yet, but they're trying. Some propose some kind of supernova out in the Andromeda galaxy. That star just exploded, and it was a sight for a period of time, and they saw that. Listen, they're trying all types of theories to see if they can figure out some way to explain the Star of Bethlehem. But you know, when I look at the story of the Star of Bethlehem, I realize that as is in the beginning up there in the sky, just simply a sign that is interpreted as the Christ had been born, that sounds pretty ordinary. That sounds like something you might could explain until you get to verse 9. Because in verse 9, what I see is a supernatural element now. I see a light that is from the east now into the south, moving toward Bethlehem, stopping over the place, and that's uncharacteristic of any of the stars. That sounds like the hand of God at work there. That sounds supernatural, miraculous. And the truth is, I'm not sure exactly what they're seeing. See, the word star is going to refer to a heavenly light. They would use the word star if it was actually a star, what you and I call one of those suns out there in the galaxy. But they would also use the word star if it was something that is lit up like a planet that you can see. They wouldn't know a star or planet unless they could look closely. And here's the interesting thing. Even angels in the sky are sometimes referred to as the stars of heaven. And you know, one possibility here that astronomers don't even calculate, I know what happened with the shepherds out on the hillside. The angel of the Lord appeared before them over Bethlehem, and the glory of the Lord shone around about him, and that angel was shining bright and showed them the place where Christ was born. And for all I know, it could have been an angel, with the glory of the Lord guiding them to Bethlehem and showing the light. Whatever this light was, whatever this star was, it doesn't much matter what it was. What matters is it was the hand of God at work in a supernatural manner, creating a path to the baby in the manger so that the Magi could find him, and then we get the story of the birth of Christ. You see, it was a sign from God that announced Christ's birth and showed them where the Christ was. It was a supernatural phenomenon, and it's a sacred symbol then and today. A sacred symbol. It's a symbol of the birth of Christ. We see a picture on a card of a night, a little town, and a star shining bright above it, and we think Christmas. It's a symbol of the birth of Christ. It's also a symbol of hope. A symbol of hope. And that's where it becomes significant that the star was rising in the east. See, back in those ancient times, they used compass directions to convey more than just location. There's also meaning in the compass direction as well. You see, they used the west to refer to something that's on the decline. A person who's getting old. They talk about the twilight years. They talk about being in decline. Or a kingdom, a nation that's been around way too long and is starting to decline. They'll talk about the west as if it's fading away. But when something is brand new, something that's got hope and possibilities of what all it might accomplish, they pointed to the east. Because it's from the east that the sun rises every morning. It's from the east that some of those stars and planets that you can see, you'll see them just above the horizon with the morning sun. You see, the east is the direction of hope, the direction of newness and possibilities. Maybe that's why Jesus described himself the way he does in Revelation chapter 22. He says, I'm the root and offspring of David. I'm the bright morning star. You see, when you come to Jesus, you're coming to someone that gives you a fresh start and a new beginning. Someone who offers hope. Hope for a world that was lost in sin, on its way to destruction for eternity. And then that child was born in the manger, and he brought us hope. He was our morning star. And hope for you today. Because many of you have been walking the path with Christ for many years, but sometimes in our Christian walk, we get astray just a bit. Sometimes we find ourselves doing things we shouldn't do, getting caught in things we don't know how we got there, but we're there. We're frustrated with ourselves, kicking ourselves for the mess we find ourselves in sometimes. And you wish you could start over, you can. Always in Christ. There's always a chance for repentance, for a new and fresh start, because that's the significance of our morning star. That's the significance of the Christmas story, is Jesus offers an opportunity to do it right, to try again. Now, I know we've got January 1, and we'll talk about our New Year's resolution and the things I'm going to do better in 2019. You don't have to wait till January 1, right here in this Christmas season. As you think about that star from the east that pointed the way to the Christ child, you've got that opportunity now for a new beginning, a fresh start, for doing things right in your life. See, that's the beauty of this Star of Bethlehem. That's the hope it holds out for all of us, because it points to the one who gives us the opportunity for a new beginning, the one that fills our hearts with hope.